Every morning, I wake before dawn, staring at the framed photo of my family on the mantle, the one taken before everything changed, before money became more important than blood. The quiet of early morning has a way of speaking louder than people ever do. The clock ticks like it's counting my memories, and the coffee maker hums a tune I've heard for 20 years. Same house, same sounds, but the people who once filled it aren't the same anymore. The sun hasn't yet climbed over the roofs of the neighborhood when I sit by the window with my cup of coffee. From here, I can see the little yard Charles planted, the rose bush he said would outlive us both. He was right about that. Everything else, though, our children, our family, even our name, feels like it's crumbling faster than the porch steps he built with his own hands. Charles used to say, "A man's worth isn't in his wallet, it's in his word." I believed that, maybe too much. He ran Parker and Sons Construction like it was a ministry, not a business. Folks came to him for work because they trusted him, not because he was the cheapest. And though the company's name said "and Sons," the truth is, Charles never forced that on Darius. He always told him, "Find your own path, son, just walk it honest." I think that was the last time our family understood each other. When Charles died 8 years ago, a heart attack that took him in the middle of laying tile on a job site, Darius was already in college. Lila had just started her art degree. I remember calling them both from the hospital room, the machines still beeping like stubborn reminders that life doesn't stop just because you can't breathe. Darius cried that night, hard. He promised he'd come home every weekend, help me with the business, make his father proud. And he did, for a while. The first year after Charles's funeral, Darius worked weekends with my brother Henry and me. He'd show up in his old jeans, sweat through his shirts, and talk about modernizing the company. "We can build a website, Mama," he said once, "get more contracts, maybe even government work." His eyes lit up when he talked about growth. I didn't mind that. Ambition is good when it's guided by heart. But slowly, the conversations changed. The talk of our company became my vision. He started calling clients himself, negotiating things Henry and I never agreed to. I told myself it was just youthful energy, that maybe he saw things we didn't. But sometimes, when I caught him staring at Charles's old ledgers, I saw something in his eyes that didn't belong to my boy. It was the gleam of wanting more. More than pride, more than legacy. Lila noticed before I did. She's the quiet one, the listener, the dreamer. While Darius chased paychecks, she painted murals on abandoned walls and said she saw beauty where others saw decay. "Mama," she told me one night, "Darius talks like he's building a throne, not a company." I laughed it off back then. I shouldn't have. By the time Darius got promoted at his tech firm downtown, he'd already stopped coming to the shop. He wore suits that looked expensive and cologne that filled the air before he even walked into a room. He still called me Mama, but the word didn't sound like it used to. It sounded polite, distant, rehearsed. The real unraveling started one Sunday. He came home late for dinner, as usual, phone in hand, grin wide enough to fill the kitchen. "Promotion, Mama," he said, holding his phone up like proof. "Director of Operations. Big raise. We moving up." I hugged him tight, told him how proud I was, but even as I said it, I felt that chill, the kind you feel when something good is about to cost you something else. Over dinner, he started asking about the business again. "So, what's the plan with Parker and Sons?" he asked between bites. "You and Uncle Henry can't keep doing it forever." "We do fine," I said. "Small jobs, loyal customers, that's all we need." "Mama," he said, smiling but not kindly, "you're sitting on gold. That back lot alone is worth $200,000 easy. I know developers who'd buy it tomorrow." Lila set down her fork. "You mean the yard Daddy used for storage? That's not gold. That's memory." He smirked. "Memories don't pay bills." The words hung there like smoke. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would remind him where he came from, but I just said, "Eat your dinner." That was the last Sunday dinner we had together as a family. Over dinner, he started asking about the business again. "So, what's the plan with Parker and Sons?" he asked between bites. "You and Uncle Henry can't keep doing it forever." "We do fine," I said. "Small jobs, loyal customers, that's all we need." "Mama," he said, smiling but not kindly, "you're sitting on gold. That back lot alone is worth 200,000 easy. I know developers who'd buy it tomorrow." Lila set down her fork. "You mean the yard Daddy used for storage? That's not gold, that's memory." He smirked. "Memories don't pay bills." The words hung there like smoke. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would remind him where he came from, but I just said, "Eat your dinner." That was the last Sunday dinner we had together as a family. A few weeks later, Henry came to the house with papers in his hands. His face looked older, drawn. "Eve," he said, "you need to see this." He spread them on the table, official documents from the county clerk's office. "Your son filed for a business license. Same name, Parker and Sons Construction, LLC." I blinked. "He what?" "New company, same name, different owner," Henry's voice cracked. "He's trying to take the clients, the contracts, everything." It didn't make sense. Not my Darius. The boy who used to fall asleep on Charles's shoulder after long days at the shop. I called him right then. No answer. I texted him, "We need to talk, baby." He showed up the next morning, cool and polished, like a businessman walking into a negotiation instead of a son coming home. "Mama," he said, "don't be upset. I was going to tell you." "Tell me what? That you went behind my back?" He sighed, as if my love were some old-fashioned thing he didn't have time for. "You and Uncle Henry don't see the bigger picture. We're sitting on assets that could make this family wealthy. I'm trying to secure our future." "Our future?" I said quietly. "Or yours?" He looked away, jaw tight. "You wouldn't understand." That was the last honest thing he ever said to me. After that, things moved fast. Darius met with banks, developers, investors, anyone with a checkbook. He offered to buy me out, said it would be easier that way. When I refused, he grew cold. "You're letting your emotions ruin an opportunity," he said. I wanted to shake him, to ask where the boy I raised had gone, but he was already too far away, lost in some glittering world where family came second to fortune. The neighbors started talking. People noticed the new company signs going up around town. Parker and Sons Construction, LLC. Same colors, same logo Charles designed years ago, only now with Darius's name under president. I felt sick when I saw it. Henry wanted to sue, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not against my own flesh and blood. Lila came by one night and found me sitting in the dark. "Mama," she said softly, "you can't just let him do this." "What would you have me do?" I whispered. "He's my son." She knelt beside me. "He's a man making choices. That doesn't mean you have to accept them." I stared at Charles's picture on the mantel. "Your daddy used to say blood is thicker than water," I said, "but I'm starting to think money's thicker than both." Lila took my hand and squeezed it. "Then maybe love has to be stronger than money." I wanted to believe her. I really did. 2 months passed before I heard from Darius again. When he finally called, his tone was all business. "Mama," he said, "I want to make things right. Let me buy you out. Fair. You can retire. I'll send you monthly payments." "I don't want your money," I said. He sighed. "You're being emotional again. This isn't personal." "It's always personal when it's family." Silence. Then he said, "You'll regret this." And he hung up. The next morning, a letter arrived, formal, typed, signed by a lawyer representing his company. It was an offer to purchase the business for a set price, to avoid further complications. The number looked big on paper, but it felt small in my heart. Henry slammed the paper onto the table. "We'll fight this, Eve. He can't take what's ours." But part of me wasn't sure anymore. Maybe he already had. Maybe the moment he put a dollar sign on our name, something sacred had already been sold. One night, I walked through the empty workshop. The smell of sawdust still clung to the air, mixed with the faint oil scent of Charles's old tools. I ran my hand along the workbench where his initials were carved, right beside Darius's, smaller and crooked from when he was a boy. I traced both sets of letters and whispered, "You taught him to build, Charles. I just wish you taught him what not to destroy." I stood there until the tears stopped coming. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked into a future I no longer recognized. The first real cut came a week later. One of our oldest clients, Mr. Rayford, a man who'd been with us since Charles's first contract, called to cancel his project. "Nothing personal, Miss Parker," he said kindly. "Your boy offered a better deal. Said he's running the real company now." I thanked him for his honesty, hung up the phone, and sat very still. That night, I dreamed of Charles. He was standing at a work site, sunlight on his face, looking tired but proud. When I called to him, he smiled the way he used to, slow and sure. "Keep building, Eve," he said, "even if it's just yourself." When I woke, the house was silent again, but I felt something inside me shift. I realized I couldn't let Darius take everything. Not because of pride, not even because of Charles, but because some things money should never buy. Family, faith, and the story of who we are. The next morning, I called Henry. "We're not selling," I said, "not for any price." He laughed, half in relief, half in disbelief. "That's my sister." I looked out the window, watching the lights spill across the yard. If Darius wants to build something, let him. But he'll learn. Some foundations don't crack easy. Still, as I hung up, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. Because the truth was, no matter how strong I tried to be, I'd already lost something more precious than the business. I'd lost my son to a dream that didn't include us. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. That night, after Henry's call, the house felt different. Quiet, but not peaceful. I sat by the window long after the lights in the neighborhood went out, watching the moon slide across the sky. Somewhere in that silver glow, I kept seeing Darius's face, the way he looked when he was little and used to run barefoot through the yard, shouting for his daddy to wait. Now it was me waiting for a son who wasn't coming back. The next morning, I put on Charles's old denim jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and sweat, and went to the shop before sunrise. The air was cool, the kind that wakes your bones but clears your head. I turned the key, flipped on the light, and just stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet hum of the machines. It was the same sound I'd heard for decades, but that day, it felt like a heartbeat, steady, defiant. I knew then that if I let Darius take this place, I'd be letting go of more than a business. I'd be letting go of everything Charles and I built together, piece by piece, nail by nail. By 8 o'clock, Henry arrived, carrying 2 coffees and his usual stubborn grin. "You sure about this, Eve?" he asked. "Sure as I've ever been." He nodded. "Then let's get to work." We started small, calling old clients, fixing what we could, staying visible. The first few weeks were hard. Most folks had already signed with Darius's company, but word travels fast in a town like ours. A few loyal customers came back, whispering, "We'd rather have Miss Evelyn than that fancy office downtown." It wasn't much, but it was something. At night, when the tools were silent and the lights dimmed, I'd sit on the porch with my ledger and a cup of tea, counting invoices and memories. Every number told a story. Every story a reminder that we were still standing. Lila came by often, bringing home-cooked meals and quiet company. She never asked about Darius anymore. She just sat with me, painting on her little sketch pad while I balanced the books. One evening, she looked up and said, "You know, Mama, maybe Daddy built the business, but you're the one keeping it alive." I smiled, though my heart ached. Keeping something alive isn't always the same as saving it, baby. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then save yourself first." Her words lingered long after she left. About 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the city office. Darius had filed for permits to develop the land behind the shop, the same yard Charles used for storage, the same patch Darius once played on as a boy. He wanted to tear it down and build luxury townhomes. I stared at the document for a long time before I called Henry. "He's pushing harder now," I said. Henry's sigh crackled through the phone. "He won't stop till you make him." "I don't want to fight him," I whispered. "I just want him to remember who he is." "Then maybe he needs to lose something first," Henry said quietly. The next Sunday, I saw Darius for the first time in weeks. He showed up at church with that polished smile and an expensive suit that looked foreign on him. People congratulated him on his success, shook his hand, told him how proud I must be. I smiled and nodded, because that's what mothers do, even when their hearts are breaking. After service, he walked over. "Mama," he said, "we need to talk." I figured we would. He led me outside under the old oak tree, the one Charles planted when Darius was born. "I want you to sign over the yard, Mama. The development's a big deal. It'll put our family name on the map." "Our family name is already on the map," I said softly. "It's on every porch and wall your daddy built with his hands." He looked frustrated. "You're thinking small again. This is legacy, Mama. Real wealth, generational wealth." I stared at him, my throat tight. Generational wealth means nothing if it costs you your family. For a second, I thought he'd argue. But instead, he just looked past me, like he couldn't bear to see the woman standing between him and what he wanted. "You'll change your mind," he said. "Money's not the enemy." "No," I said, "but greed is." He didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving me under that oak, listening to the wind move through the branches. The same wind that once carried his laughter when he was a boy. After that day, Darius stopped pretending to be gentle. Letters from his lawyers came weekly, warnings, offers, even veiled threats about rights of development. Henry wanted to fight fire with fire, but I told him no. I wouldn't let this turn into hatred. One afternoon, Lila came by and found me sorting papers on the kitchen table. "He's really doing this, isn't he?" she asked. I nodded. "Seems so." She leaned against the counter. "You ever wish you could go back?" "All the time," I said. "But then I remember, back is where the pain started." She smiled sadly. "You sound like Daddy." I smiled too. He'd tell me to stand firm. That night, I wrote Darius a letter, not from a mother defending her pride, but from a woman trying to reach her son. "Darius, there's nothing in this world I wouldn't have given you if you'd asked with love. But the way you're going, son, you're building castles on quicksand. You think success is about how high you climb, but it's really about who stands beside you when you get there. I'll always love you, but I won't sell what your father and I built just to make room for something that has no soul. Mama." I didn't know if he'd read it, but writing it made my heart lighter. Weeks passed, business was slow, but our name was still alive. Then, one humid August evening, a man knocked on the shop door, a foreman from Darius's company. "Miss Parker," he said, nervous, "you should know, they started breaking ground behind your property today." My stomach turned cold. "Without approval?" He hesitated. "They'll get it retroactively. Money talks." I drove straight there. When I arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky blood orange. Bulldozers were parked on the edge of the yard, and young men in hard hats milled about. Darius wasn't there, but his company's banner was, a shiny sign that read, "Parker and Sons, LLC, Building Tomorrow." I walked up to the nearest worker. "Who told you to start here?" he said simply. I stared at that sign until my eyes blurred, then turned and walked back to my truck. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. Not the loud, vengeful kind, but the quiet fire that comes when something sacred is being desecrated. That night, I called my lawyer. "I want an injunction," I said. If he so much moves a shovel of dirt on that property, I want it stopped. Miss Connolly's voice was calm. We can file tomorrow. And we did. The next few days were a storm. Phone calls, reporters, neighbors asking questions. Darius called once, his tone sharp. "You're humiliating me, Mama." "I'm protecting what's mine," I said. "It's just land. It's legacy." He went quiet, then said coldly, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I whispered, "but at least I'll regret it for the right reasons." When the judge granted the temporary injunction, I thought I'd feel victorious, but all I felt was tired. Winning against your own blood doesn't feel like winning at all. That night, Lila cooked dinner at my place. Fried catfish, greens, cornbread, all the things Charles loved. We ate quietly until she said, "Mama, you think he'll ever come back from this?" I looked down at my plate. "I don't know, but I'll keep the porch light on." After she left, I stood at the window again, watching the yard where the bulldozers had stood earlier that week. The moonlight touched the rosebush Charles planted, its petals glistening like tears. I whispered into the quiet, "If you can hear me, Charles, guide our boy home. He's lost out there." The next morning, I found something taped to the workshop door, a folded envelope with my name on it. Inside was the letter I'd written to Darius weeks earlier, creased and smudged, but with a single line added at the bottom, in his writing. "I'm trying, Mama. I just don't know how to stop." I sank onto the steps, letter trembling in my hands, tears running freely. Maybe he wasn't gone completely. Maybe, beneath the suits and the contracts, my son was still in there, buried under all that ambition. I pressed the letter to my chest and looked up at the sky. The morning light was soft, forgiving. For the first time in a long while, I felt something like hope. I sat on the porch steps for what felt like hours, the morning light growing brighter, the paper softening between my fingers. "I'm trying, Mama. I just don't know how to stop." Those words rolled around in my head like a hymn half forgotten. For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired and sad and somehow grateful, because those 7 words meant my boy was still in there somewhere, trapped under all that ambition, clawing for air. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my apron pocket, and whispered, "Then we'll figure it out together, baby. Even if you don't know how to stop, I'll show you where to start." The next few days were quiet. The injunction had halted his construction plans, and the papers stopped coming. Folks around town were still gossiping, but I ignored it. Every time I looked at that folded letter, I felt something in me soften. Still, I knew silence didn't mean peace. It just meant the storm was gathering elsewhere. On a Thursday afternoon, I was at the workshop sorting through invoices when the door opened and Darius walked in. No suit this time, just jeans, sneakers, and a wrinkled shirt. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired money can't hide. "Mama," he said softly. I froze, then slowly set down the papers. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to come," he said, a sad smile flickering across his face. "But I needed to." He walked around the room like a man remembering a dream. His hand brushed over the workbench, over the initials carved into the wood, his and Charles's. "You kept everything the same." "Some things ain't meant to change," I said. He nodded slowly. "I saw your lawyer's statement. You fought hard." "I fought fair," I corrected. He let out a long breath. "You always do." We stood in silence for a while. Then he turned to me. "You were right about the company. The investors pulled out after the injunction. They said I was too risky." I blinked, unsure what to say. He laughed bitterly. "They talk about loyalty, Mama, but loyalty dies fast when money starts leaking. Some of those men I called friends won't even return my calls." "You built your house on quicksand, baby," I said gently. "You can't blame the storm." He rubbed his hands over his face. "I thought I was doing it for us. I wanted to make you proud." Son, I said, stepping closer, you were already everything I could be proud of before you ever made a dollar. His lip trembled just slightly, and for a second, I saw my boy again, the one who used to sit on the porch steps, eating popsicles and talking about building skyscrapers someday. Then why does it feel like I ruined everything? He asked. Because you're human, I said softly, and because you forgot the why while chasing the how. He dropped his head. I don't even know how to fix it. You start by owning it, I said. Then you build again, this time from truth, not greed. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. You'd still help me? After everything I've done? I'm your mother, I said simply. I may not like your choices, but I'll never stop wanting you to come home. He nodded, swallowing hard. Then I guess I'm home. The days that followed felt fragile, like walking on glass. Darius started visiting the shop again, quietly, humbly. He didn't touch the business side, just helped Henry patch a wall, carried lumber, swept the floors. He said little, but sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, I caught him staring at the old sign over the door, Parker and Sons Construction, like it was something sacred he'd forgotten the meaning of. One afternoon, while Lila was there painting a new signboard for the shop, Darius came over, watching her work. You always had the gift, he said softly. Lila didn't look up. You always had the greed. His shoulders stiffened. I deserve that. She kept painting, her brush strokes slow and steady. You deserve forgiveness, too, but not before you earn it. He nodded quietly. I know. They worked in silence for a while after that. I watched from the doorway, heart aching, but hopeful. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not loud apologies or perfect endings, but small moments of truth spoken without hate. A few weeks later, I got a call from the city. Mrs. Parker, the woman said, we've received notice that Mr. Darius Parker has withdrawn all development proposals tied to your property. I thanked her and hung up, hands trembling. That evening, Darius came by. You heard, he said with a small smile. I did. He looked out at the yard where the bulldozers once stood. I'm going to dissolve the company, Mama. It's poisoned. Everything about it feels wrong now. I wanted to argue, to tell him not to throw everything away. But then I realized he wasn't destroying something. He was cleansing it. What'll you do instead? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe start smaller. Build something real. Honest. I smiled faintly. Sounds familiar. He laughed softly. Guess the apple didn't fall too far after all. Then his face grew serious. Mama, I know I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I want to make it right. I want to rebuild Parker and Sons. With you. I studied him carefully. There was no slickness in his tone this time, no smooth-talking businessman, just a son, stripped down to his truth. You sure? I asked. Because building together means more than just hammer and nails. It means trust. He nodded. Then I'll earn that too. The next few months passed slow but sure. Darius kept his word. He worked side by side with Henry, learning humility, one scraped knuckle at a time. Lila helped rebrand the business. New logo, new website, but same old values. Sometimes folks still whispered. Some called it a miracle. Others said money would change him again. I didn't argue either way. I just watched. One chilly morning in December, we got a call from the local church. Their roof had caved in from heavy rain, and they needed repairs fast. Without hesitation, Darius said, "We'll do it. No charge." When I looked at him, he smiled. Daddy would have done the same. We spent a week there, all of us, me, Darius, Lila, and Henry, working from dawn till dusk. The whole town came to help. By the time we nailed the final shingle, the sunset was glowing behind the steeple like a blessing. As we packed up, Reverend Carter came over, clapping Darius on the shoulder. Good work, son. Feels good to see Parker and Sons back where they belong. Darius smiled humbly. Feels good to belong again. That night, we gathered at my house for dinner. Lila brought peach cobbler, Henry brought laughter. Darius sat across from me, quieter than usual, thoughtful. After everyone left, he lingered in the doorway. "Mama," he said, "I know you still don't trust me all the way, and that's okay. I just, I want you to know I never meant to choose money over you. I thought I was building a future. I didn't see I was tearing down a family." Tears welled in my eyes. The future don't mean much without family to share it with. He nodded, eyes glistening. "I get that now." I reached out, took his hand, and squeezed him. And then, "You're already richer than you think." He smiled softly, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I love you, Mama." When he left, the house felt full again, not of noise, but of peace, the kind Charles used to bring home at the end of a long day. Later that night, I sat on the porch, the cool wind brushing my face. I pulled Darius's letter from my pocket, the one that started this new chapter, and unfolded it one last time. The ink was faded, the edges worn, but Beau's words still burned clear. "I'm trying, Mama. I just don't know how to stop." Now, I whispered into the quiet, "You did stop, baby. You stopped chasing what didn't matter." In the yard, the rose bush Charles planted years ago was still standing strong, its petals trembling in the moonlight. I smiled. Maybe love really was thicker than money after all. The night air was cool, soft against my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence didn't ache. I sat there watching the moonlight spill across the rose bush Charles planted, petals trembling in the wind, and whispered to myself, maybe we're finally gonna be all right. I believed it too. For weeks after that, the house felt alive again. Darius stopped by nearly every evening, sometimes bringing takeout, sometimes just bringing himself. He and Lila laughed more, teased each other like they used to. Henry came around with new contracts, small jobs mostly, but steady ones. The shop buzzed again with the rhythm of saws and hammers, that old song of honest work. One Saturday morning, Darius showed up early with breakfast and a surprise, matching Parker and Son's work shirts, neatly folded in a box. He grinned as he handed them out. "Figured it was time we looked like a real crew again." Henry chuckled. "Boy, I've been a real crew since before you had teeth." Lila laughed, tugging hers over her paint-splattered t-shirt. "Well, I look official now." When he handed mine to me, I saw the details stitched in small letters under the logo. Est 1993, rebuilt 2025. I traced the words with my finger. "You did this?" He nodded. "Thought it was time we owned both our beginnings." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just smiled and said, "Your daddy would have liked that." That day, we worked together on a community center renovation, all four of us under one roof, laughing, sweating, arguing, and forgiving as we went. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in years, that was enough. But peace, I've learned, never stays still for long. About a month later, a black car pulled up outside the shop. Out stepped a tall man in a gray suit with a face too smooth to trust. "Afternoon," he said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for Mr. Parker." Darius wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. "That's me. How can I help you?" The man extended a card. "Name's Richard Grant. I represent Hawthorne Development Group. We've been following your career for some time." My stomach tightened. I didn't like the sound of that. "I'm not sure I'm interested," Darius said cautiously. Mr. Grant smiled wider. "You might want to be. We're working on a major project just outside Atlanta. Residential, commercial, sustainable design, something that could redefine the skyline. We need someone with your vision to oversee construction." "Sounds big," muttered. "It is," Grant said smoothly, "and lucrative." He slid a folder across the workbench. Seven-figure compensation, full creative control, partnership potential down the line. I saw Darius hesitate, his jaw tightening, eyes flickering, just the way they used to when ambition whispered in his ear. "I appreciate the offer," he said finally, "but I've got commitments here." Grant shrugged, unbothered. Just think about it. Offers like this don't come twice. When the man left, silence filled the room. Henry broke it first. You ain't actually thinking about it, are ya? Darius sighed. I don't know, Uncle Henry. It's a big opportunity. Lila scoffed. So was the last one. Look how that turned out. He looked at her, guilt flickering behind his eyes. This is different. I studied him quietly, then said, You don't have to decide right now. Just remember, son, some doors lead forward and some lead backward. They just look the same when they open. He nodded slowly, but I could see the old hunger stirring. Over the next few days, Darius got quieter. He stayed late at the shop, but didn't say much. Sometimes I'd find him staring out the window, lost in thought, or scrolling through something on his phone with a frown. One evening, after Henry and Lila had gone home, I found him sitting on the workbench, elbows on his knees. Something on your mind? I asked. He rubbed his face. They sent over the contract. It's huge, Mama. Bigger than anything I've ever been offered. If I take it, I could build a future for all of us. You already are, I said softly, right here. He shook his head. No, this is small-time stuff. Patching roofs, repainting porches. That project, it's legacy, Mama. Real legacy. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Legacy built on whose back this time? He didn't answer. I stepped closer, my voice low. You remember what almost happened last time you chased something that big. He looked up at me, eyes conflicted. I remember losing everything, but I also remember what it felt like to dream bigger. Dreams ain't wrong, baby, I said. It's what you let them cost that matters. He didn't reply, and I knew then. I was losing him again, one heartbeat at a time. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter, in Darius's writing. Mama, I'm going to Atlanta to meet the Hawthorne team. I'll be back tomorrow. Don't worry, I just need to see for myself. I sat down at the table, the note trembling in my hand. Lord, I whispered, please don't let him fall again. That day crawled by slow. Every phone ring made my heart jump. I didn't sleep that night, just sat by the window like I used to when Charles worked late shifts, praying for the sound of footsteps on the porch. When Darius finally came home the next afternoon, I could tell before he spoke. The answer was yes. They made me an offer I can't ignore, he said, voice low. It's 6 months of work, Mama. Just 6. I'll come back after. I stared at him, the air thick between us. You don't see it, do you? The way money makes you talk softer, but love makes you louder. He frowned. This isn't about money. It's about growth. No, I said firmly. It's about temptation, wear the suit. He looked hurt. I thought you'd be proud. I am proud, I said, tears rising. But I'm scared, too. Scared that the man who came back to me, the one who found humility, won't survive that world again. He took a step closer, his voice breaking. I'll be careful, Mama. I promise. I wanted to believe him. So I hugged him tight and whispered, Then go with God, baby. But don't forget where home is. The weeks that followed felt hollow. The shop ran fine, the bills got paid, but the air had lost its warmth. Lila tried to stay positive, but I caught her glancing at Darius's empty chair more than once. He'll come back, I told her, though I wasn't sure if I meant his body or his heart. News of the project spread fast. It was all over the local papers. Atlanta's skyline to change under new leadership. Hawthorne Group partners with Parker. Every headline felt like a small betrayal, but I smiled anyway, because mothers know how to love quietly, even when it hurts. Then, one evening, about 2 months in, my phone rang. It was Darius. Mama, he said, his voice strained. Something's wrong. My heart lurched. What happened? The company's cutting corners, he said. Cheap materials, unsafe labor. I told them it wasn't right, and they told me to mind my place. If I walk away now, they'll ruin me. I gripped the phone tighter. Then let them, Darius. Don't let greed turn you into them. He went silent. I could hear him breathing. Then he whispered, I don't know what to do. Yes, you do, I said softly. You've known all along. A week later, Darius came home without warning. He looked exhausted, clothes wrinkled, eyes red. He dropped a folder on the table, contracts, reports, emails. I exposed them, he said quietly. Whistleblower. They'll come after me, but I couldn't be part of it anymore. I covered my mouth, tears welling. You did the right thing, baby. He nodded, voice trembling. I finally stopped. I walked over, took his face in my hands, and said, Then you started becoming who you were always meant to be. He leaned into my touch like a child again. I'm sorry, Mama. You already said it with your actions, I whispered. That night, after he went to bed, I stepped outside onto the porch once more. The wind was gentle, the stars bright above the yard. The rosebush swayed softly, petals glowing under the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, I felt no fear, just peace and pride. Because my son hadn't chosen money this time. He'd chosen blood. He'd chosen home. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles on a soul like a blessing. I could still feel the weight of Darius's hug, his trembling voice echoing in my chest. I finally stopped. I sat there on that porch swing until the first hint of dawn began to chase away the stars. For once, I didn't dread the morning. It felt like light was coming back into our lives. Not the harsh kind that exposes wounds, but the gentle kind that helps them heal. But peace, I've learned, doesn't just ask to be felt. It asks to be protected. The next few days were calm on the surface, but I could feel a storm brewing underneath. Darius stayed home, quiet, restless. The news hadn't broken yet, but it was only a matter of time. He'd told me everything. How he'd leaked the documents to a reporter he trusted, how Hawthorne's top executives were under investigation now. I didn't know much about corporate law, but I knew enough to understand that whistleblowers often paid a price. Are you scared? I asked him one morning as we sat in the kitchen, our coffee cups cooling between us. He looked at me and tried to smile. Maybe a little, but not of them. I'm just scared that everything I've worked for is gone. Baby, I said gently, sometimes you gotta let something die so something better can live. He looked down at his hands, rough from weeks of honest labor again, and nodded. I hope you're right. By the end of that week, the story hit the news. Whistleblower exposes corruption at major Atlanta development firm. Former partner turns against Hawthorne Group. Darius's name was everywhere. TV, social media, the local paper. Some called him a hero. Others called him a traitor. But the cruelest ones were the lies whispered by those who never knew the truth. He only did it for attention. He's just bitter they dropped him. Probably wants hush money. I stopped checking the news after the first day, but I could see the toll it took on him. He'd sit at the kitchen table, scrolling through the headlines, jaw tight, eyes dark. One evening, I took the phone from his hand. Stop feeding the fire, Darius. You can't control what they say, but you can control how you live through it. He sighed. I just don't want to be remembered as the man who lost everything. Again. You won't, I said. You'll be remembered as the man who stood up when it mattered. He looked at me then, and I saw something new in his eyes. Peace mixed with pain, but also resolve. A few weeks later, things started shifting. Reporters stopped calling. The city officials who once ignored us reached out, thanking Darius for speaking up. Some even offered smaller contracts, honest work, rebuilding what Hawthorne had destroyed. We took them. Slowly, quietly, we rebuilt. But healing doesn't just happen in headlines. It happens in moments, the kind most folks never see. Like the morning Darius joined me in the garden, helping prune the rosebush Charles planted decades ago. His hands were clumsy, but careful. These flowers always come back, he said, studying a bud just beginning to open. They do, I said, even after the hardest winters. He smiled faintly. Guess I know how that feels now. We worked in silence for a while, and I thought of how far we'd come. There was a time I feared money had stolen my son for good, turned his heart into something shiny and hollow. But sitting there beside him, the dirt under his nails and sunlight in his hair, I realized something important. Money might have changed him, but love had changed him back. Spring came early that year. The shop thrived again. Small jobs, local clients, steady paychecks. Layla painted a mural on the side wall that read, "Built on blood, not gold." Every passerby stopped to look at it. Sometimes Darius would catch folks staring and laugh. Guess we've got ourselves a slogan now. Henry grinned. You got yourself some wisdom now, boy. We started hosting community workshops, teaching high school kids how to build, how to measure, how to dream with their hands instead of their wallets. Darius took charge of that, and I swear, watching him with those kids, patient and humble, was like seeing Charles all over again. One afternoon, after the last of the students left, Darius turned to me and said, "Mama, I think this right here, is what I was meant to build." I smiled through tears. Then maybe you finally found your foundation. He looked down at his hands, smiling softly. Ours, Mama. It's ours. That night, after everyone went home, I stayed out on the porch again. The air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and laughter still lingering from dinner. I looked at the house, the workshop, the rose bush, the stars above, all of it built from loss, from love, from stubborn hope. And I realized something I wish I'd known years ago. Money may build walls, but love builds homes. Money may fade, but legacy, real legacy, lives in the people who choose truth over comfort and family over pride. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and smiled to myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just proud of my son. I was proud of the woman I'd become. The one who refused to let greed define her family's story. And as the night settled around me like a blanket, I whispered the same words I had said 100 times before. But this time, they felt like a prayer finally answered. We're all right now. The crickets sang me into the night, their rhythm slow and steady, the same rhythm my heart had finally learned again. I sat there until the air turned cool and the moon slipped behind the trees. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to get up and fix anything. The world, my family, my heart, they were all where they needed to be. The next morning smelled like rain. Clouds rolled in soft and gray, hanging low over the pines. I brewed a pot of coffee and set out 2 cups out of habit. One for me, one for Charles. I still talked to him every morning, even though the answers had long since become silence. "Morning, love," I murmured. "You'd be proud of that boy of ours. He's finally standing on solid ground." The old clock ticked, the house breathing its slow, familiar sigh. I smiled to myself, thinking of how different this kitchen felt now. No more tension, no shouting, just peace settling in the corners like dust in sunlight. Later that week, Darius stopped by with Lila and Henry to share news about the city project. "Mama, we broke ground today," he said, excitement bright in his eyes. "Families'll move in before next Christmas if all goes right." Lila nudged him. He even insisted on fair wages for every worker. Henry chuckled. "Boys learnin'." Darius laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I finally figured out what Daddy meant by measure twice, cut once." "That's not just about wood, you know," I said. "It's about choices, too." He nodded that now. We sat around the table, talking plans, laughing, eating peach cobbler until the sky outside turned the color of copper. I listened more than I spoke, just soaking in the sound of my family. Voices that once carried anger, now carrying warmth. When they left, Darius lingered on the porch. "Mama," he said quietly, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have," I said, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." He hugged me tight. "I'm gonna make you proud every day." "You already did, baby." As the weeks went on, the house grew busy again. Sometimes Darius dropped by covered in sawdust. Sometimes Lila came by with sketches of murals for the new housing project. She'd named the design Roots of Promise, a tree whose branches stretched across brick walls, each leaf painted by a different child who would live there someday. When I asked her why that name, she said, "Because roots don't chase the sun, Mama. They hold the ground." That sentence stayed with me. It felt like the truth of everything we'd been through. Summer arrived in a rush of green and thunder. The city project drew attention. Local papers wrote about Parker and Sons, the family business that had once fallen apart but found its way back. Folks from church stopped me after service to say how proud they were of Darius, of me, of all of us. I smiled politely, grateful, but what I was most proud of wasn't in any newspaper. It was in the quiet ways we'd changed. The way Darius paused to listen before speaking. The way Lila forgave him, not with words, but with shared work. The way Henry still teased us all, keeping laughter where bitterness once lived. It was healing that didn't announce itself. It just happened, like dawn after a long night. One afternoon, Darius came by holding an old wooden box. "Found this cleaning the workshop," he said. Inside were some of Charles's old things, a pocket watch, a carpenter's square, and a faded notebook full of sketches and quotes. One page caught my eye, Charles's handwriting looping across the paper. "If ever money becomes louder than love, remember who you are building for." I pressed my fingers to the words. "He wrote this when we started Parker and Sons," I said softly. Darius smiled faintly. "Guess he knew we'd need reminding someday." We sat in silence for a long time, both of us staring at that sentence. Then Darius closed the notebook gently and said, "Maybe we should hang it in the new office." "Maybe we should," I said. When fall rolled around, the first houses of the project stood proud and ready. Darius invited me to the opening ceremony. The mayor gave a speech, cameras flashed, but all I could see was my son, standing tall, shoulders square, his hand steady as he cut the ribbon. After the applause died down, he called me onto the stage. "None of this," he said, voice thick with emotion, "would exist without my mother. She taught me what building really means." The crowd clapped again, but I barely heard them. I was too busy fighting tears. Later, after everyone left, we walked through one of the finished homes together. The air smelled like fresh paint and promise. Darius ran his hand over the smooth banister. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It feels right," I said. "You built something honest this time." He smiled. We did. That night, back home, I took out Charles's old notebook again. I turned to the blank pages at the back and started writing, something I hadn't done in years. Today, I watched our son finish what we started. He learned the hardest way that money can buy comfort, but it can't buy peace. I think we've all learned that, and maybe that's the real inheritance we'll leave behind. I closed the book and set it on the mantel beside Charles's picture. He was smiling in that photograph, sawdust on his shirt, eyes bright with life. "You'd be proud, old man," I whispered. "Your boy found his way home." Winter came early that year. The days shortened and the evenings grew cold. But inside our home, there was warmth, the kind that doesn't come from fire, but from hearts finally resting easy. On Christmas Eve, we all gathered again. Lila brought a cake shaped like a hammer, for tradition, she said. Henley wore a Santa hat that didn't fit, and Darius handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a new wooden sign for the shop. It read, "Parker and Sons Construction, built on blood, guided by love." I traced the words, tears spilling before I could stop them. "It's perfect," I whispered. He smiled. "So are you, Mama." That night, as laughter filled the house, I realized we'd come full circle. Not to the same place we began, but to something deeper. We hadn't just rebuilt a business. We'd rebuilt faith, forgiveness, and family. Later, when the others went home and the house was quiet again, I stepped onto the porch one last time that year. Snowflakes drifted down like tiny miracles, melting against my skin. The rose bush was bare now, its stems dark against the snow. But I knew come spring it would bloom again. Everything does, given time and care. I closed my eyes and thought of all that had happened, the greed, the loss, the hurt, the healing. And then I whispered, not to the night, but to Charles, to God, to anyone listening. Money may have tried to divide us, but love outbuilt it all. The wind stirred softly through the trees, like an answer. I smiled, letting the cold air fill my lungs. The world felt wide again, open and forgiving. When I went back inside, I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the mantel lamp beside Charles's photograph. 3 generations of love, all in one small room. I whispered the words that have carried me through every storm, the same words that now felt like the story's true ending. We're home.